Hello, everybody, and welcome. Today is Class A Monday, a Magic Monday, because we are starting a new book, and it's going to be Éliphas Lévi's Transcendental Magic. For anybody who missed out on that announcement, well, here you go. You're getting the announcement again. But I'm going to check my sound real quick. It's working. It's working good. Okay, cool. So, yep, this is Jay Balvell, and welcome to an all new class where we are going to study this book here, Transcendental Magic. But I just said that. You already heard that part. If you're new to this channel, however, and you end up enjoying this content, then please hit a like, share, or subscribe. And so both books I picked, since we'll at least for these next couple books, we'll stick with this Class A, Class B format. And then from there, I guess we'll have to see where we go. Protea Seer of Eons, welcome, bro. Great to see you, man. I just hit you back on that comment too on that Bible read. I appreciate your feedback and I appreciate your presence here. So, both of the books I've chosen, though, this one and the Dhammapada, we're gonna have, especially on the Dhammapada, that one's got like 100-page introduction. So we'll be working on the introduction for a bit before we actually get into the bulk of the text. But usually I find those are pretty important to read. They're not in there for no reason. So I think we'll stick with it. And so today we'll also be getting through the introduction on this before we get into the book proper. And this book is actually one that it was originally the in French Dogma and Ritual of Magic, of High Magic. And so it's in two parts. And so the way it's designed to be read is that you read from the doctrine and then you read from the ritual. So we'll do it in that format where at least one section a day at a time where we'll read the or as like Crowley's book is titled Theory and Practice of Magic, Doctrine and Ritual, Theory and Practice, same difference. But today we'll just be getting through this introduction written by Arthur Edward Waite, right? None other than the Waite of the Rider-Waite Tarot. So let me play our music. I think I've got one picked out that's going to be some good vibes. We'll pull a card and then we'll get into it. Welcome into all of you who are just popping in. Great to have you guys here. Okay, what's our card going to be today? And also, some of you who maybe came over for the more Christian, more Bible stuff, don't let the cover of this book scare you. You need to understand that most of these, basically all of these things, are symbols, not actual terrifying things, even though they might look like it sometimes, like a spooky Baphomet or Satan or devil, however you interpret it. But really, it is a symbol of exactly what Imelda Santillan says. Santillan, maybe it's the double L's that sound like a Y. Santillan. Exactly, God loves you, and that's exactly what it is. It's a symbol of the alchemy that God has us all on task here to be working on. But I get it. Some people want to call out sick from work. Some people want to say, screw you, God. Some people think they're helping God, but they're just kind of not. And hey, who am I to judge? I don't know what you're doing. You're probably doing it big, but hard to know for sure. But either way, welcome to you, Imelda Santillan, and to all the rest of you. So, one more shuffle of these and we'll see. There we go. It's this card. And it is it's the art card. Oh no. Close. Kinda. The strength card. Well, strength, not the trump card. The pips. The 9 of wands. This card popped up for me the other day too. This one's got a heavy moon energy. Lunar energy. Because it's Yesod, but then I believe it's also the moon in Sagittarius. So this one's real heavy with this astral work that I've been working on. The goddess and I, we've been trying to really up our game in that way. And let me tell you, man, that's a whole other can of worms. But I think if I remember right, Éliphas Lévi talks a bit about that in here. So we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. And if not, then I think at another point in the pretty near future, I might read something that's a lot more specific to astral type of work. But anyway, so this card, kind of that focus of Sagittarius, that one-pointed arrow, but into those more creative, astral, dreamlike spaces. But you also see a bit of alchemy here because of this. So the wands in this case are arrows. You can see the feathers here in the shape of crescent moons, and then the arrowhead themselves again are crescent moons. And then this one here, the center one, the 8 in the background with the 1 in the center for our ninth, has the sun at the top, moon at the bottom. So it could be looked at as a kind of a similar alchemical theme, like we see here in this symbol of the Baphomet, the symbol of unifying opposites, creating harmony within your life in all the different ways that you personally need to do so. At least if that's the type of time you're on. Maybe you think it's a bunch of nonsense, and hey, that's fine, that's fair. You're allowed to think that. Either way, the Lord is working through you, baby. Okay, so let's get right into it. Transcendental Magic, Its Doctrine and Ritual by Éliphas Lévi. This was originally written in, let's see if it says, not 1958. That's when Ryder and Co. would have started publishing it. I want to say this was first written in the 1800s or the 1700s, 1800s, I think. So it's quite the old text. Here, I could look it up real quick. Let's find out for sure. 1810. That's a while ago. Oh no, okay, that was when he was born. He lived from, so it looks like it was published in, I don't know, it's giving me a range of years. 1896. That's what it says. No, 1854 and 1856. There you go. So I think it was published to a mass audience in 1896, but originally probably a little bit more of a private publishing in 1854 and 1856. So, wow, man, that's one. I'm looking that up. I'm bringing that up because that's something will want to and need to keep in mind as we read this book. That this information is going to be pretty good for the time it dropped, but we'll have to see just how it translates over for our current time. Because, like all things in the human experience, magic evolves. I mean, there are definitely certain fundamental things that are pretty set, but there's also other things like chaos magic has come along since then. Chaos magic wouldn't have been a thing when this first dropped. And chaos magic has kind of taught us that, well, you can get a little wild with things and it'll still, I mean, there is still steps to it, but you can be a little more loose, we'll say. Okay, so this biographical preface, and then let me double check because I think that was about, and then yeah, the introduction. So we'll try to knock both those out today, the biographical preface and the introduction. But I got to get started, or it's gonna be a longer stream. So let's do it. All right. Biographical preface. Éliphas Lévi Zahed is a pseudonym which was adopted in his occult writings by Alphonse Louis Constant, and it is said to be the Hebrew equivalent of that name. The author of Dogma et Ritual de la Haute Magie was born in humble circumstances about the year 1810, being the son of a shoemaker. Giving evidence of unusual intelligence at an early age, the priest of his parish conceived a kindly interest for the obscure boy and got him on the foundation of Saint Sulpice, where he was educated without charge and with a view to the priesthood. He seems to have passed through the course of study at that seminary in a way which did not disappoint the expectations raised concerning him. In addition to Greek and Latin, it has been alleged that he even acquired considerable knowledge of Hebrew, though it would be an error to suppose that any of his published works exhibit linguistic attainments, more especially in that language. He entered on his clerical novitiate, took minor orders, and in due course became a deacon. He was also appointed a professor at the Petit Seminary de Paris, but at some uncertain date subsequently the story is that he was expelled suddenly for holding opinions contrary to the teaching of the Roman Catholic Church. The existing accounts of his expulsion are hazy and incorporate unlikely elements, as, for example, that he was sent by his ecclesiastical superiors to take duty in country places, where he preached with great eloquence what, however, was doctrinally unsound. But I believe that the preaching of deacons, though possible, is not practiced in the Latin Church. Pending the appearance of the biography, which has been promised for many years in France, we have few available materials for a life of the Abbé Constant. I'm doing my best with these French words. I only took French 1. And real quick, give me a sec, guys. I'm gonna have to try to pin this down a little better. Since it's a bigger book, it has a little harder time fitting on the book stand, but we'll make it work. Just give me a moment. There, that ought to do it. In any case, he was cast back upon the world with the limitations of priestly antecedents, while the sacerdotal career was closed to him. And what he did or how he contrived to support himself is unknown. By the year 1839, he had made some literary friendships, including that of Alphonse Esquirol, the now almost forgotten author of a fantastic romance entitled The Magician. And then here, this footnote, let me take a look at real quick. Otherwise, Papoose, a more recent French occultist, once asked scornfully in an extended study of the doctrine of Éliphas Lévi, who now remembers anything of Paul Augnet or Esquirol, journalists pretending to initiation and posing as professors of the occult sciences in the salons they frequented. No doubt they are forgotten, but Éliphas Lévi states in the Histoire de la Magie that by the publication of his romance of The Magician, Esquirol founded a new school of fantastic magic, and gives sufficient account of his work to show that it was in parts excessively curious. Okay, then. And Esquirol introduced him to Ganu, a distracted prophet of the period, who had adopted the dress of a woman, abode in a garret, and there preached a species of political illuminism, which was apparently concerned with the restoration of la vraie legitimité. He was, in fact, a second incarnation of Louis the 17th, come back to Earth for the fulfillment of a work of regeneration. It says a woman who was associated with his mission was, in like manner, supposed to have been Marie Antoinette. Constant and Esquirot, who had visited him for the purpose of scoffing, were carried away by his eloquence and became his disciples. Some element of socialism must have combined with the illuminism of this visionary, and it appears to have borne fruit in the brain of Constant, taking shape ultimately in a book or pamphlet entitled The Gospel of Liberty, to which a transient importance was attached, foolishly enough, by the imprisonment of the author for a term of 6 months. 6 months. And it says on that footnote, an alternative story is that the brochure was called La Voix de la Famine, that it appeared in 1846 and entailed a year's imprisonment as well as a fine of 1,000 francs. There is some reason to suppose that Esquirot had a hand in the production and also in the penalty. His incarceration over, Constant came forth undaunted, still cleaving to his prophet, and undertook a kind of apostolic mission into the provinces, addressing the country people and suffering, as he himself tells us, persecution from the ill disposed. And that footnote says a vicious story, which had some publicity in Paris about 1905, charges Constant with spreading a report of his death soon after his release from prison, assuming another name, imposing upon the Bishop of Evreux, and obtaining a license to preach and administer the sacraments in that diocese, though he was not a priest. He is represented as drawing large congregations to the cathedral by his preaching, but at length the judge who had sentenced him unmasked the impostor, and the sacrilegious farce thus terminated dramatically. Dang, this guy already, he's got the wild, living on the wild side. But the prophet ceased to prophesy, presumably for want of an audience or because death broke up his mission, and la vraie légitimité was not restored. So the disciple returned to Paris, where, in spite of any pledge implied by his diaconate, he effected a runaway match with Mademoiselle Naomi Cadillot, a beautiful girl of 16. Look, French is hard, dude. They got all these letters in here that you don't actually pronounce. So if we got a French expert hanging around here, give me a hand. This lady bore him 2 children who died in tender years, and subsequently she deserted him. Her husband is said to have tried all expedients to procure her return, including black magic and pacts with Lucifer, according to the silly calumnies of his enemies, but in vain, and she even asserted her position further by obtaining a legal annulment of her marriage on the ground that the contracting parties were a minor and a person bound to celibacy by an irrevocable vow. This is also doubtful. I have searched the Pontifical Romanum and all its rites of ordination in vain for any trace of a vow of celibacy imposed on secular priests. The lady, it may be added, had other domestic adventures, ending in a second marriage about the year 1872. Madame Constant was not only very beautiful, but exceedingly talented, and after her separation she became famous as a sculptor, exhibiting at the Salon and elsewhere under the name of Claude Vignon. Moreover, she wrote fiction and did a certain amount of journalism, perhaps in the earlier part of her career. In the sense of her artistic genius, it is not impossible that she is something more than a memory even at this day. At what date Alphonse Louis Constant applied himself to the study of the occult arts and their literature is not less uncertain than are other events of his life. The statement that in the year 1825 he entered a fateful path which led him through suffering to knowledge must not be understood in the sense that he underwent any kind of initiation at that period, which was indeed early in boyhood. It refers obviously to his enrollment among the scholars of Saint Sulpice, which in a sense led to suffering and perhaps ultimately to what passed with him for science, as it certainly obtained him education. The episode of the New Alliance, so Janot termed his system, connects at least with an obscure quality of illuminism and occult pretension on the side of hallucination, and may have furnished the required impulse to the mind of the disciple. But in 1846 and 1847, certain pamphlets issued by Constant under the auspices of Librairie Sociétaire and Librairie Phalanstérienne show that his inclinations were still towards socialism, tinctured by religious aspirations. And that one has a good footnote saying a very large number of obscure and ephemeral publications are attributed to Constant in catalogues of French booksellers. There is reason for believing that he was the compiler of La Livre Rouge, 1841, under the pseudonym of Hortensius Flamel. It is described in the subtitle as a summary of magism, the occult sciences, and Hermetic philosophy. In this case, he was responsible also for Le Livre de Haut, 1842, being revelations of human destiny by means of chiromancy, under the same name, setting aside various anonymous writings which may be attributed in error. He is credited as Abbé Constant with Des mots et des doctrines du rationalisme en France, 1839. Oh man, I'm gonna probably skip reading a bunch of these French things. So he's been credited with a handful of these different pamphlets, it looks like. Some of them having occult ties, some of them on socialism. Okay then. The period which intervened between his wife's desertion, and that one says, I must not be understood as definitely attaching blame to Madame Constant for the course she adopted. Her husband was most probably approaching middle life when he withdrew her from her legal protectors, and the runaway marriage, which began under such circumstances, was little better than a seduction thinly legalized, and it was afterwards not improperly dissolved. Man, and they thought ADHD and ADD was a modern thing, huh? The way this thing's bouncing around between footnotes and the main part of the text. Okay, so the period which intervened between his wife's desertion and the publication of the Dogme de la Haute Magie in 1855 was that, probably, which he devoted less or more to occult study. In the interim, he issued a large Dictionary of Christian Literature, 1851, which was extant for many years in one of the encyclopedic series of the Abbé Mignet. This work betrays no leaning towards occult science and indeed no acquaintance therewith. What it does exhibit unmistakably is the intellectual insincerity of the author, for he assumes therein the mask of perfect orthodoxy, and that accent in matters of religion which is characteristic of the voice of Rome. The Dogme de la Haute Magie was succeeded in 1856 by its companion volume, the Rituel, both of which are here translated for the first time into English. It was followed in rapid succession by the Histoire de la Magie, 1860, La Clef des Grands Mysteries, 1861, a second edition of the Dogma et Rituel, to which a long and irrelevant introduction was unfortunately prefixed, 1861. Fables et Symboles in 1862, Les Sorcières des Moudon, a beautiful pastoral ideal impressed with the cachet kabbalistique, and La Science des Esprits, 1865. The two last works incorporate the substance of certain pamphlets published in 1846 and 1847. And so I don't know how true it is, because I've heard that obviously occultism, magic, esotericism, all the different names for the mysteries of spiritual factors of life and practices, that there's a lot that still hasn't been translated, and I've heard, but I can't say that I've confirmed for sure, that in French there's a lot of really good stuff that still hasn't been translated. I would think it would have been, because we've been pretty good about translating things from French for a while, but I remember I did hear that at one point, But again, that's a little more tenuous of a statement. But if you are somebody who knows one way or another, then please let me know. The precarious existence of Constant's younger days was in one sense but faintly improved in his age. His books did not demand a large circulation, but they secured him admirers and pupils, from whom he received remuneration in return for personal or written courses of instruction. He was to be found commonly chez lui in a species of magical vestment, which may be pardoned in a French magus, and his only portrait during lifetime, prefixed to this volume, represents him in that guise. He outlived the Franco German War, and as he had exchanged socialism for a sort of transcendentalized imperialism, his political faith, at its value, must have been tried as much by the events which followed the siege of Paris as was his patriotic enthusiasm by the reverses which culminated at Sedan. His contradictory life closed in 1875 amidst the last offices of the church, which had almost expelled him from her bosom. He left many manuscripts behind him, most of which by now have been published posthumously, and innumerable letters to his pupils. Baron Spedalieri alone possessed 9 volumes, have been preserved in many cases, and offer not infrequently a curious undesigned commentary on the formal treatises. No modern expositor of occult claims can bear any comparison with Éliphas Lévi, and among ancient expositors, though many stand higher in authority and are assuredly more sincere, all yield to him in living interest, for he is actually the spirit of modern thought, forcing an answer for the times from the old oracles. Hence, there are greater names, but there has been no influence so great during the last 2 centuries. No fascination in occult literature exceeds that of the French magus. The others are surrendered to specialists and the typical serious students whom dull and unreadable masterpieces are in effect dedicated, directly or not, but he has been read and appreciated, much as we read and appreciate new and pleasant verse, which, through some conceit of the poet, is put into a vesture recalling Chaucer. Indeed, the writings of Éliphas Lévi stand as regards the old line of supposed initiation in relatively the same position as the earthly paradise of Mr. William Morris stands to the Canterbury Tales. There is the recurrence to old conceptions, and there is the assumption of old drapery. But there is in each case a new and very modern spirit. The incommunicable axiom and the great arcanum, Azoth, Enri, and Tetragrammaton, which are the vestures of the occult philosopher, are like the cloth of Bruges and the hogsheads of Genie, Florence gold cloth, and Ypres napery of the poet. In both cases, it is the year 1850 in a mask of high fantasy. Moreover, the idle singer of an empty day is paralleled fairly enough by the poor and obscure scholar who has recovered the lever of Archimedes. The comparison is intentionally grotesque, but it obtains notwithstanding, and even admits of development, for as Mr. Norris, in a sense, voided the raison d'etre of his poetry, and in express contradiction to his own mournful question, endeavored to set the crooked straight by betaking himself to socialism, so Eliphas Levi surrendered the wand of supposititious miracles and voided his doctrine of magic by devising a one-sided and insincere concordant with orthodox religion and expiring in the arms of my venerable masters in theology, the descendants and decadents at that of the imbecile theologians of the Middle Ages. Students of Eliphas Levi will be acquainted with the qualifications and stealthy retractions by which the position of initiated superiority in the Doctrine and Ritual had its real significance read out of it by the later works of the Magus. And Royal Thunderbird 888, what up? Welcome. Says, what's up, sire? What's up to you? I hope you're having a good Monday, a good start to your week. I have dealt with this point exhaustively in a digest of Lévi's writings, which passed through two considerable editions. And though it is now out of print, there is no call to go over the same ground a second time. And he says, see the critical essay prefixed to The Mysteries of Magic, a digest of the writings of Éliphas Lévi. Moreover, I am awaiting the opportunity which will be created when his life appears ultimately in France to reconsider his position as an expositor of so-called occult science and philosophy. Meanwhile, I propose to indicate as briefly as possible some new considerations which will help us to understand why there were amazing discrepancies between the Doctrine and Ritual of Transcendental Magic and the volumes which followed on these. In the first place, the earlier books were written more expressly from the standpoint of initiation, as conceived by their writer, and in the language thereof. They contain obviously much which it would be mere folly to construe after a literal fashion, and what Éliphas Lévi wrote at a later period is not so much discrepant with his earlier instruction, though it is this also, as the qualifications placed by a professed transcendentalist in the second half of the 19th century on the technical exaggerations and miraculous pretensions of occult claims and records. For the proof, we need to travel no farther than his original introduction to the doctrine of magic, or take the Hebrew manuscript cited therein as to the powers and privileges of the Magus. And on that footnote, it says, in the authenticity of this alleged manuscript, it must be said that I do not believe. It is to the manner born of Lévi himself in a grandiose mood of affirmation and carries no suggestion whatever of the 16th century. Alternatively, if there is any document on which it is based, this has been so worked over that it has passed out of all recognition. So dang, this guy, yeah, he really was. He was doing like all kinds of pseudonyms. He was trying to pass off fake manuscripts, but that a lot of people did that really. Here, the literal interpretation would be insanity. These claims conceal another meaning of what is called the moral kind and are trickery in their verbal sense. They are what Éliphas Lévi himself terms hyperbolic adding. If the sage do not materially and actually perform these things, he accomplishes others which are much greater and more admirable. They remind us of the alchemist who is said to have confessed finally that the philosophical stone signified contentment. It is this idea substantially which Lévi offers in more exalted form as the term and crown of adeptship. But no such interpretation is in itself sufficient to take account of the issues that are involved. It will not explain, for example, why Éliphas Lévi, who constantly teaches in the Doctrine and Ritual that the dogmas of so-called revealed religion are nurse tales for children, should have insisted subsequently on their acceptation in the sense of the Orthodox Church by the grown men of science. Secondly, the precise period of reflection which produced the Doctrine and Ritual of Transcendental Magic as its first literary result is not indicated with any certainty, as we have seen in the life of the author, nor do I regard Éliphas Lévi as constitutionally capable of profound or extensive book study. Intensely suggestive on the mere surface, he is at the same time without evidence of depth. Splendid in ready generalization, he is without accuracy in detail, and it would be difficult to cite a worse guide over mere matters of fact. His History of Magic is a case in point. As a philosophical survey, it is admirable, and there is nothing in occult literature to approach it for literary excellence, but it swarms with historical inaccuracies. It is in all respects an accomplished and in no way an erudite performance. Nor do I think that the writer ever concerned himself with any real reading of the authorities whom he cites. The French verb parcourir represents his method of study, and not the verb approfondir. Let us take one typical case. There is no occult writer whom he cites with more satisfaction and towards whom he exhibits more reverence than William Postel. And of all Postel's books, there is none which he mentions so often as the Clavis Absconditorum a Constitutione Mundi. Yet he had read this minute treatise so carelessly that he missed a vital point concerning it, and apparently died unaware that the symbolic key prefixed to it was the work of the editor and not the work of Postel. I am citing one case only, and have termed it typical, being representative of things analogous by the score of hundreds which could be cited throughout his volume. One explanation is that his Gaelic vivacity would have been blunted too quickly by the horrors of mere research. But there is a second, which is more to our purpose. He had reached certain lights, otherwise principles of interpretation, which in his view were keys to the whole occult subject, and for one of his temperament, they curtailed the necessity of research, making visits to the Bibliothèque Nationale and the Arsenal of only subsidiary importance. There was a time when I accepted the evidence of lying witness and believed that Éliphas Lévi had come somehow within a circle of occult initiation and had proceeded a certain distance through its supposititious grades, that the publication of his Doctrine and Ritual had closed his path of progress for its undue exercise of personal discretion in the revelation of occult hypotheses. Example, the astral light, that the imperfections of this work might be explained by supposing the school to have other grades of knowledge than those into which he had entered, that the doors being closed upon him accounted for his later books offering no further developments of the occult subject, and lastly, that the virtual retractations and subterfuges contained therein might have signified an attempt to make peace with the alleged school for his violation of its affirmed law of secrecy. The deponents in question represented the initiation in question, and as I have since had an opportunity of searching all their warrants, I know now that it was not extant in the days that Lévi wrote. The hypothesis of a universal glass of vision and an agent of magical power was neither the invention of Lévi nor the secret of a 19th century sanctuary of occult knowledge. It belongs to the records of the past. On the vague and scattered intimations of these records, which are in alchemical and magical books, Lévi went to work and produced those developments which will be found in the pages that follow. And there is no question that he believed himself to have discovered the key of all occult phenomena, the master explanation of all occult theorems. It was in the enthusiasm consequent hereon that he wrote the Doctrine and Ritual, inspired for the most part with the certitude of a professional magus, though his indomitable skepticism intervenes from time to time, as those who read will see. Oh, we're going to see, all right. All right. For Éliphas Lévi, more especially at the period of his initial occult enterprise, was fundamentally a materialist. A materialist, moreover, who at times approached perilously towards atheism, as when he stated that God is a hypothesis, which is very probably necessary. He was further a disbeliever in any real communication with the world of spirits. He defines mysticism as the shadow and the buffer of intellectual light, and loses no opportunity to enlarge upon its false illuminism, its excesses, and fatuities. There is, therefore, no way from man to God in his system, while the sole avenues of influx from God to man are sacramental, and in virtue merely of a tolerable hypothesis. Thus man must remain in simple intellectualism if he would rest in reason. The sphere of material experience is that of his knowledge, and as to all beyond it, there are only the presumptions of analogy and the consolations of an aspiring heart. Now, it is possible, apparently, for a purely skeptical philosopher to become an occultist and yet remain a skeptic, seeing that Lévi did so. But it remains that a view like this answers to no occult beliefs or even pretenses that have prevailed throughout the centuries, while much less is it the summum bonum of any greater initiation. Yeah, and you'll hear that that's kind of two of the main problems with people coming into the occult is they either lean too heavy into the skepticism or on the other side of the coin, you could say are too much of a believer and fewer people align somewhere in the middle. Occult pneumatology is more by its own hypothesis than an alphabetical system argued Kabbalistically, and more than mere memories can, on the same assumption, be evoked in the astral light. Set forth at its best, the standpoint of occult metaphysics would be rather that the hierarchic order of the visible world has its complement in the invisible hierarchy, which analogy leads us to discern, being at the same time a process of our perception rather than a rigid law governing the modes of manifestation in all things seen and unseen. Initiation may take us to the bottom step on the ladder of the invisible hierarchy and instruct us in the principles of ascent, but the ascent rests personally with ourselves. The voices of some who have preceded can be heard above us, but they are of those who are still upon the way, and they die as they rise into the silence, towards which we also must ascend alone, where initiation can no longer help us, unto that bourne from whence no traveler returns, and the influxes are sacramental only to those who are below. Dang. Well, that's reassuring. It follows that Éliphas Lévi invented an occult philosophy before he explained occultism, that it is his own and no other's, that when in his later books he added, revised, and altered amidst many contradictions in the process, we are confronted only with the shifting moods of a brilliant mind which had no certain anchorage outside a hypothesis for explaining certain phenomena. To this he adhered always, but on the larger occult claims, the magnum opus, the universal medicine, and so forth, he allegorized more and more, and while that tendency may have brought him nearer to one side of Hermetic truth, it voided more and more the aggressive occult dogmatism of his doctrine and ritual. Here is the canon of criticism concerning the man and his work. The position is curious, but it is quite simple. And to my thinking, it is this which makes him interesting, because he is sui generis. There is no consequence whatever in the modern occult philosopher per se, such as Dr. Pappus, Stanislas de Guaita, and a cloud of later writers more fatuous than these, that we should take them seriously, as exhaustively they have taken themselves. But Éliphas Lévi has shown us that outside the circle of physical and normal mental science, there is only a dark borderland which is a realm of all intellectual folly and all hallucination, and that the proper province of true occult philosophy is to apply this touchstone of rational criticism to all which comes forth therefrom and to those who explore therein. There was a time when he thought otherwise, a moment, a year, or just so long as it took him to write Les Dogmes et Rituels de la Haute Magie for the exposition of his hypothetical discovery concerning astral light. With his whole mind and his whole heart, he accepted and cleaved to this because it helped him to explain everything in occult phenomena without assuming veridic elements at the root of any. But he felt later on that the iridescent verbiage of these volumes had credited too much to the fascination of their subject. And in later writings, he applied a pumping process to all that he had said of this order, and left Browning's vacuity. Being armed at every point, one sec. Okay. Being armed at every point with such a rule of interpretation, he remained an occult philosopher for whom there was no occultism, save indeed a set of Kabbalistic theorems adapted to his metaphysical notions by a process of resting and a set of symbolical picture cards called tarot, into which he read that which he wanted. So also in respect of the Catholic and Roman religion and its dogmaticum, he had pumped out all meaning from that, to shape it in his mind thereafter as a moral and aspirational symbology, which took duty in the absence of spiritual truth and offered some kind of consolation to a mind widowed of living faith. As he loved occult theorems apart from occult happenings, so he loved Roman forms. And as he venerated the golden chain of imagined adeptship, so he venerated the notion of hierarchic teaching and believed firmly that those should rule the world of human thought who understood Latin doctrine and practice according to his own considered private judgment. He never left intentionally the church of his childhood, but he defended it on his own terms. He died in the end fortified by its last rites, and under the paradoxical denomination of occult philosophy. His memorials are with us as an attempted Irenicon. What's that? A statement that attempts to harmonize conflicting doctrines. All right then. So his memorials are with us as an attempted statement attempting to harmonize conflicting doctrines between modern thought and Roman doctrine, which has never deceived anyone but possibly him who devised it. An annotated translation exceeded the scope of my original undertaking in 1896, but is offered in the present revised and enlarged edition. This notwithstanding, there is much in the text which follows that offers scope for detailed criticism, and there are points also where further elucidation would be useful. One of the most obvious defects, the result of mere carelessness or undue haste in writing, is the promise to explain or to prove given points later on which are forgotten subsequently by the author. Instances have been noted in several places concerning the method of determining the physiognomy of unborn children by means of the pentagram. But there are yet others concerning the rules for the recognition of sex in the astral body, concerning the notary act, concerning the magical side of the exercises of St. Ignatius, and concerning the alleged sorcery of Grandier and Gerard. In some cases, the promised elucidations appear in other places than those indicated, but they are mostly wanting altogether. There are further perplexities with which the reader must deal according to his judgment. I have indicated that the explanation of the quadrature of the circle is a childish folly, that the illustration of perpetual motion involves a mechanical absurdity. But the doctrine concerning the perpetuation of the same physiognomies from generation to generation is not less ridiculous heredity. The cause assigned to cholera and other ravaging epidemics, more especially the reference to bacteria, seems equally outrageous in physics. There is one other matter to which attention should be directed. The Hebrew quotations in the original and the observation applies generally to all the works of Lévi, swarm with typographical and other errors, some of which it has proved impossible to correct. Lastly, after careful consideration, I have judged it with the wiser course to leave out the preliminary essay which was prefixed to the second edition of the Doctrine and Ritual. Its prophetic utterances upon the mission of Napoleon III have been stultified long since by the subsequent events. It is devoid of any connection with the work which it precedes. And representing as it does the later views of Lévi, it would be a source of confusion to the reader. The present translation is based, therefore, on the first edition of the Dogme et Rituel de la Haute Magie, omitting nothing but a few unimportant citations from the old French grimoires in an unnecessary appendix at the end. The portrait of Lévi is from a carte de visite formerly in the possession of Mr. Edward Maitland, and was issued with his Life of Anna Kingsford a number of years ago. Well, shoot, that was quite the preface. But we did it. Who wrote that one? Did it say? I guess that was weight 2. It says translated, annotated. Yeah, it must have been A.E. Waite that did the whole thing. So, introduction, I don't know, maybe we'll save that for tomorrow because that's like another 20 or so pages. And we're already creeping up on an hour. And I've got some chores to do. Yeah. All right. Let's just plan that. Let's just plan the introduction tomorrow, and then we'll get into the text proper on Wednesday. No biggie. We're not in a hurry. But I'll show you real quick. Here's a sick image some of you might be familiar with. The great symbol of Solomon, the macro precipice and the micro precipice, or the white and black, the light and dark Yahweh, which if I remember right from Dion, this is a good image to meditate on to understand Hakma and the creator beholding its own reflection. Let's see, he has something he says about it here too, because he has some notes on the figures. So he says, the great symbol of Solomon, the double triangle of Solomon, represented by the two ancients of the Kabbalah, the macroprosopis and the microprosopis, the god of light and the god of reflections, of mercy and vengeance, the white Jehovah and the black Jehovah. All right, then. Cool. Well, not a bad way to start it out. It's good to read little things like that so we can understand the history. We can understand the person who wrote the dang thing a little better, as well as just what the times were like, you know what I mean? Because France has had a wild history. And it sounds kind of like Ophel. It sounds like we're going to be kind of reading an Ophel style book, which is going to have some pretty good information, but also maybe a little bit at times of a head scratcher. So I hope you are looking forward to it. We will pick up tomorrow with the introduction, and then Wednesday, the book proper. I appreciate you all so much. I hope you're having a good start to your week. And until then, this has been Jay Baldale. Much love, many blessings, and bye-bye.